Jose Menendez. What's that? No what? This hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. Mr. Secretary, I know you've been doing a lot of traveling around the world and have a lot of important issues to deal with, and we appreciate very much you coming in today to talk about your budget and your testimony today. And as you know, the purpose of this hearing is to learn more about the State Department's FY 2016 budget request. I know that these hearings also become a time, in many cases, to talk about public policy issues. I think you know there may be some questions about the AUMF and other issues that you're dealing with at this time. So we appreciate you answering all of those. One of our top priorities is to complete a State Department authorization that helps the Department become more efficient and effective within a sustainable budget. Chairman Perdue will be taking on that effort. I know we met yesterday with Heather Higginbotham from the State Department, had a good meeting to launch that. And I think all of us want to make sure that as we're dealing with the many crises that we're dealing with around the world, that the State Department is set up in a way to leverage our efforts and to ensure that we're doing on a daily basis everything we can to make sure that we continue to pursue our national interests in so many ways. And that's the purpose of doing that. Obviously, the President has sent forth a budget that increases spending $74 billion, and I think all of us understand that's not where we're going to be. I know you're here today to talk about your component of that, but we all know that that's not where the budget is going to end up. It's going to be at a greatly reduced number. So we know we have some challenges in front of us, and we appreciate, again, you being here for us to be able to talk with you about those. State Department is also proposing some increases in foreign aid, not just in foreign ops. And yet, in many cases, there's a difficulty in trying to evaluate the effectiveness of that. Again, I think that's one of the important reasons for having an authorization. Our overseas contingency operations funding still compose about 14% of spending, and at some point, I think we all know we've got to move away from funding through OCO to getting things on an enduring budget. And again, that's something that through the budget process, we're going to attempt to do this year. I do have 4 things I'd like to highlight, and that is the State Department right now has an over-reliance on OCO and carryover balances, and I think there's a great concern that those carryover balances create a lack of discipline within the Department. The budget's misalignment with strategic planning efforts such as a quadrennial diplomacy and development review process, those not being linked up in an appropriate way seem to miss an opportunity to make sure that we are aligned properly. We have a massive increase in peacekeeping that betrays previous agreements with the United Nations on the U.S. share of funding. And we have a failure to reprioritize resources in line with the Asia rebalance. Been a lot of discussion about that, but it's very difficult to see the resources that are being put forth to deal with that. So we look forward to your testimony. I know there'll be numbers of questions, not just about the budget, but other activities that you've been dealing with. We thank you for your service to our country. We thank you for taking time out to be with us today. And with that, I'd like to recognize the distinguished ranking member, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the committee. I see you have a big binder there, so hopefully it's got all the good answers that we want to hear. As we meet, it's a challenging time for state's budget and for the nation. Negotiations are continuing with Iran even as it perpetuates the war in Syria. ISIL is expanding its territory and sphere of influence in the Middle East and North Africa, and Putin has again reneged on his commitments to solve the Ukrainian crisis. At the same time, China is rising, pressing for its own political and territorial advantages. In Africa, Ebola has caused nearly 10,000 deaths and remains a threat due in part to a lack of an adequate medical infrastructure and delivery system. So we have many challenges in the world, and I know that the State Department is at the forefront of trying to meet those challenges. The fact is that world history has taught us that no matter what the threat or challenge, dealing from a position of weakness is always a greater provocation than dealing from a position of strength. So I appreciate your total engagement, as evidenced by the fact that in 306 travel days, you've logged over 700,000 miles to 59 countries, and we'll be looking forward to being able to hear what we have accomplished in some of that travel. I just want to take one or two moments to talk about one or two issues as a framework. On Iran, I stand second to no one. You see my desire of a negotiated solution that rolls back and dismantles Iran's illicit nuclear program. But a deal that allows Iran to continue as a nuclear threshold state, gives it power, gives it relief from sanctions, potentially allows it to go from being a threshold to an actual nuclear weapons state, is no deal at all. I'm very concerned about the news that is leaking from the negotiations, and that this entire deal will hinge on inspection and verification regimes while leaving Iran with a vast majority of its nuclear infrastructure. And in a much, if the facts, and we don't know whether they are facts or not, but if various reports suggest it, in a matter of time that is far less than anybody would have envisioned. On Cuba, I think the deal was one-sided. The regime has not changed tactics. In fact, it's flaunting its success in the negotiations. Last week's congressional visits, which didn't include any visits with human rights activists, political dissidents, or independent journalists, were followed by the arrest of more activists across the island. In Havana, 70 members of the Ladies in White were arrested. Several dozen more were arrested for accompanying them. Prominent civil society leaders, Antonio Rodiles, Angel Moya, as well as independent labor leaders Alexis Gomez Rodriguez and Pavel Herrera Hernandez, were also arrested. On the same day, in eastern Cuba, over 90 activists from the Cuban Patriotic Union were arrested in Santiago. Another 13 ladies in white were arrested in Santa Cruz, along with Sakharov Prize winner Guillermo Fariñas. But that's not all. One of the ladies in white was actually splashed with tar. Clearly, the regime hasn't changed, and if anything, seems that they can do this with impunity, notwithstanding our engagement. And finally, on Ukraine, the most recent diplomatic efforts seem to have only emboldened Putin. Since Minsk II, there have been hundreds of ceasefire violations, and the city of Debaltseve has fallen under rebel control. Putin's forces now threaten Mariupol, which could provide a land bridge to Crimea, and his intentions are clear. On February 9th, the President said that providing lethal defensive weapons is one option being considered by his team. I look forward to hearing whether this option is more likely given the failure of Minsk II. It is something that this committee, in a bipartisan fashion, sent to the President, signed by the President. I hope that we will help the Ukrainians be able to defend themselves. You know, sending them night vision goggles and being able to see your enemy doesn't do very much for you if you can't stop them. And that's where we're at right now. I do want to say one very supportive thing, in addition to recognizing your most recent comments on Ukraine, which I applaud. For the past several years, I have complained, cajoled, encouraged, pleaded, and pushed in every way I know how the U.S. needs to direct additional resources to foreign policy priorities in our own hemisphere. And the budget request for Central America focuses on the right priorities and is a very good start. We need to work with these countries and help create opportunities, which is in our own national security interest. I look forward to discussing those and other issues with you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez, and again, we want to thank you for being here. I think you know the drill. Your comments will be entered into the record with no objection. Your full comments, if you could keep your comments to about 5 minutes. I know there's going to be robust questioning, and with that, thank you again. We look forward to your testimony.
Well, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Menendez and my good former colleagues, and I guess one person that I didn't have a chance, Senator Perdue, welcome to this great committee, and I'm delighted to be able to have a chance to be here to share an important dialogue. I appreciate the comments that both of you have made. I'm not going to pick up on all of them now because I'm confident that during the questions we'll have a chance to dig into most of the things that you raised. But, and I will summarize to try to maximize our time and respect yours. But I want to just make it clear that since leaving the perch up there that you sit in, Senator Corker, as chair, and having spent, 29 years on this committee, beginning way over here, even further than my friend Eddie Markey, I watched a lot of events unfold in the course of my service on this committee and in the Senate. Number of wars, major debates. It is interesting for me to see, from now serving as secretary, the reality, the degree to which what we choose to do is really important, and how the Congress acts makes just a gigantic difference to the sense of unity, of purpose about our country. And this is about our country. It really shouldn't be about party. The old saying that, you know, foreign policy concerns and national security interests should end at the water's edge. And what has come home to me more than anything is the degree to which we, the United States, are privileged and sometimes burdened with the responsibility of leading. I mean leading, making things happen, stepping in where others don't or can't, won't. And I will say to you that I believe we legitimately, I mean, you may disagree with how we're doing in Libya at this particular moment, or you may think something more should have been going on in Syria. But I'll tell you, I can't think of a time, and I hear this from former colleagues, from former secretaries, when we have had to deal with as many explosive, transformational moments historically than now. And I just want to respectfully suggest to all of you, and I will say this at some point, and I'll talk about it at length. I hope I can get a chance to do so in classified session where I could say more about it. But we ask for 1% of the federal budget, 1% of the total budget of the United States of America goes into everything we do abroad. All of our efforts for our citizens, our visas, our embassies, our counterterrorism, our aid, our assistance, everything, 1%. But I absolutely guarantee you that well more than 50% of the history of this era will be written off that 1% and off the things we do or don't choose to do in terms of foreign affairs. And when you look today at the challenge of at Daesh, ISIS, when you look at the clash of modernity with opportunity and culture and youth populations and bad governance, corruption, all the challenges that are out there, we got our work cut out for us. Now, we are leading in putting together this unprecedented coalition. I say unprecedented because this is the first time in anybody's memory that anybody knows about 5 Arab countries, Sunni, engaging in proactive military operations in another country in the region, Syria, in order to go after a terrorist organization. And we have 5 major channels of effort on foreign fighters, on humanitarian, on counter-messaging, on counter-financing, on the kinetic, all of which are geared to try to win this. And we will win it. I'm confident in that, providing we all make the right choices. We certainly have the tools. In Iraq, we worked diplomatically to implement the president's policy to make certain that that we didn't take over that effort before there was a transitional government in place. And I'm telling you, we spent an amazing amount of time and hours in good diplomacy to help the Iraqis to make their own decisions about their leadership for the future, to transition away from Maliki to Prime Minister Abadi and a new, inclusive, proactive, capable governance. We got, as you know, last year, all the chemical weapons out of Syria. No small feat, particularly when you consider that if we hadn't done that, they'd be in the hands of ISIL today. We have been leading the effort to curb Ebola. We took the risk. President Obama took the risk of sending 4,000 young American troops to build the infrastructure so we could deal with that. It was risky at the time he did it because nobody had all of the answers, but it worked. And America led an effort to bring people to the table to help keep this from providing the 1 million people dying that were predicted if we didn't have the response that was provided. In Ukraine, we have worked hard to hold together a complex array of partners in the sanctions. And the sanctions have had a profound effect. The ruble is down 50%. Russia's economy is predicted to go into recession this year. There's been a capital flight of $151 billion. You know, they may be able to pursue this short-term goal of stirring the waters of Ukraine, but in the long term, Russia is writing itself out of the future as a consequence of the choices it's making, falling behind in technology and production and a whole lot of other things. The fact is that on Iran, sure, it's controversial and may have some risks, but we are daring to believe that diplomacy may be able to provide a better alternative to ridding Iran of the possibility of a nuclear weapon than a war, or then going first to the threats that lead you to confrontation. So we are trying. I can't make a prediction what the outcome will be, but we're leading in that effort to try to help make that happen together with our P5+1 partners. In the Western Hemisphere, the senator from New Jersey mentioned what we're trying to do. In Korea, we are working with respect to North Korea, we're working with the Chinese. We've been able to make certain changes I'd rather talk about in classified session. On Afghanistan, we rescued a very complicated election process, negotiated a BSA, got a unified government, and now we're working on a transition with the potential even of some talks taking place with the Taliban. On global trade, we're pursuing two of the biggest trade agreements in memory. 40% of GDP in the TPP and 40% of GDP in the TTIP. And the Asia rebalance and Africa, we hosted the Summit of African Leaders. AIDS and PEPFAR, we have continued, we've ramped up. President Obama made a deeper commitment. And the result is that we are on the cusp of perhaps having the first AIDS-free generation in history in Africa. And in China, we came through with a historic climate agreement by which both of us have agreed what we can try to do within our executive powers to lower emissions and to begin to prepare to get an agreement in Paris this December. And that's leadership, because by getting the two of us together and leading in that effort, we have about 45% of the world's emissions at the table agreed to reduce in a way that leads others to the table. So I had a more prepared comment. These comments I'm giving you are not the prepared comments, and I'll submit them all for the record, Mr. Chairman, but there are other policies we need to talk about, and I'm prepared to do so. But I want to just make the point to all of you. Sequestration, I was here, you know, when it happened, and I don't like it, and I didn't like it then, I don't like it now. Sequestration is depriving the United States of America, the world's most powerful nation on the face of the planet and the world's richest nation. It is institutionalizing the notion that Congress is either unwilling or incapable of making a decision and choices, and it is arbitrarily winding up doing things to our budget that historically knocked our GDP down and lost a lot of jobs. Not to mention that it deprives us of making the decisions about what we're going to do to make that 1% or hopefully more have a greater impact in providing for the security and protecting the interests of our country. So I plead with all of you to think about how we are going to meet this moment of challenge. We had I'll end on this. We had a counterterrorism summit this past last week, which really underscored how big a challenge this is. It's a generational challenge. My parents, our parents, many of you generation rose to the challenge of World War II. We spent the then equivalent of about $3.9 trillion. Today, maybe about $30 trillion. But we rose to the occasion. We did what we had to do to beat back fascism. And I think it is a legitimate question to ask whether or not the rule of law, the norms of behavior that we fought for all those years since World War II, that we're going to do our part to uphold them and to make it possible for other countries to not be subjected to the fascism and dictatorship and tyranny of a group like ISIL that rapes young girls and imprisons people, women, and burns books and destroys schools and deprives people of their liberty, burns pilots, cuts off the heads of journalists, and basically declares a caliphate that challenges all of the nations in the Middle East and elsewhere, and threatens all of us with violence. So we face a challenge, and I hope everybody here will stop and think about all of the components of how we respond to that. It's not just kinetic. The next Secretary of State will be back here with a new acronym. The next president will be asking you to deal with somebody somewhere, unless we start to think about how the world joins together to drain the pool of recruits that are readily accessible to people with such a warped and dangerous sense of what life ought to be like. So that's what this meeting, that's what these discussions about the budget are about. And I hope we're going to kind of pull ourselves together in a way that facilitates my visits with a lot of leaders around the world. When I walk in and say, how you doing on your budget? And they look at me, and I can tell what they're thinking. Or we say to them, hey, we ought to be doing this or that. And, you know, we advocate democracy, and we have to say, you know, well, how's yours working? I've been asked that. So it's up to us, and that's my message for my opening statement. I look forward to the hearing.
Well, we appreciate those opening comments, and I know that people understand this is more of a budget hearing, but since you've moved into other policy issues, I'm going to feel very free to move into those also. I would just ask a question. I assume if we only spend 1% of our budget on State Department and foreign aid operations, you would think we need to do that in the most efficient way possible. Do you agree with that?
Of course, obviously.
And I would think you would support then an authorization being put in place. We haven't done one since 2003. I actually didn't do one the entire time you were chairman for reasons that I'm not aware of, but you do support that now as head of the State Department. Is that correct?
We actually made a run at an authorization bill, Mr. Chairman. I would have loved to have passed one. In fact, the last authorization bill I think was passed, I did it, when Senator Pell was chairman, and he deputized me to try to get an authorization bill through, and we did. I'm delighted to see you take this bull by the horns. We have not seen a state authorization, I guess, enacted into law in 2002. It elapsed in 2004. Yeah. And there are the reasons of the way the Senate came to work that literally made it impossible to do. So I would love it if you can do it.
Well, let's, I hear that, and I think that probably we'll spend a lot more quality time, if you will, with Heather and others in the department. I know you're dealing with a lot of other issues. We had a very good meeting yesterday, and I do sense that you support that, and we appreciate that very much. And I am aware of the history regarding some of the complications, and certainly that was not meant as a criticism. Let's move on to then I spent the last week in Baghdad and in Erbil, up in Kurdistan, and in Ankara, talking with Turkish officials along with ours. You have sent a request for an authorization for the use of military force. The President has. But it's your belief today that the administration has the legal authority to conduct operations against ISIS with existing authorities. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is correct.
That we're looking for a separate authority under the AUMF.
But you believe that you have the authority?
We believe we have the authority under the 2001. That's the testimony that I gave you in December, absolutely. Yeah. And we do believe that.
So one of the things that I know people are going to be looking for if you're asking for a separate authorization, I know there's some debate among the committee here as to whether you do or do not have the legal authority. You believe you do. But one of the things that people are going to be looking to is there a real commitment by this administration to deal with ISIS? And I have to tell you, as I look at the authorization and I visit Turkey and understand what's happening in Syria, I have to ask this question: do you believe that it is moral? Do you believe that it's pragmatic to spend a lot of money training and equipping people in far-off places to come back into the fight in Syria and not protect them from the barrel bombs that Assad will be dropping against them? Do you believe that's a moral place for us to be in the country, and a pragmatic place for us to spend money training people and yet not protect them from the barrel bombs that Assad will be dropping on them?
No, I think it goes beyond morality, frankly, Senator. I think it's a matter of practicality. If we're training people and they have a goal and we're committed to the goal, I think it's important for them to be successful. And I think it's important since the Title 10 program that we've now joined into together, which is going to train folks partly to go after ISIL particularly. It seems to me that if Assad were to attack them or somebody attacks them in the course of the time that they're going after ISIL, that's part of the fight. And so we need to provide that. That discussion.
So our authorization should actually authorize the administration to go against Assad when they're doing things that take on the Free Syrian Opposition that we're training.
That's not what I said.
Well,
Going
I mean,
after
that's
Assad is an entirely different component of this, which then raises all kinds of challenges with respect to the management of the coalition itself. What I said was they have to be authorized, the authorization is such that defending those who are engaged in the fight of ISIL, it seems to me, is an important part of defeating ISIL. But that's a debate as to how that's implemented that is taking place in the administration right now. The President hasn't made a final decision on that. I think we need to be discussing that as the AUMF comes together. But what is important is that the President have as much leeway as possible within the 3 years that he's asked for to be able to get the job done.
yeah.
Now, he's asked for 3 years, partly because when he came in.
If you could, I understand about the timeline. Let me just say this. On the ground, and dealing with those people that we want to bring into this coalition in a more serious way, the fact that we are not willing to talk about an air exclusion zone above Aleppo, or we're not willing to provide air support for Free Syrian folks that we are training against ISIL, by the way, this is what this Title 10 program is about, makes it appear that we are not serious in this effort, and it makes many of us on this committee concerned about the administration's commitment to this effort, and you can understand why that's the case. And I know that they are holding back, and you know this, they're holding back what they're doing until they find out whether we are committed to doing those things that would actually allow these people to be successful on the ground. And if we're not willing at this front end to say that we're going to protect them after they're trained and coming in, especially around the Aleppo area, which is likely where they will enter, if we're not willing to protect them, it speaks to the fact that the administration doesn't really seem serious about taking ISIS on as it relates to Syria.
Senator, let me make it as clear as I possibly can. This President is absolutely determined to accomplish the goal that he set out, which is to degrade and destroy ISIS. Now, he has begun with a particular focus on Iraq because of the fragility of Iraq originally, because there is an army that is significantly trained and available but needs more training, and because there is a urgency, an immediate urgency to trying to restore Iraq in Anbar and in the Sunni province because of the impact on holding the integrity of the country together and ultimately driving ISIS out. That's what we believe we'll do. At this point in time, we've flown some 2,500 strikes, about half and half in Syria and Iraq. At least huge numbers of ISIL top leaders have been taken off the battlefield. Almost 1,000 ISIL fighters were killed in the course of the Kobani fight, which you may recall everybody heralded as the test of America's commitment, the test of the war. It was about to fall, and we, on the other hand, upped our strikes and negotiated diplomatically to be able to create a corridor to get the Peshmerga to come in and ultimately reinforce the people there, and won. And ISIS had to admit it lost, and it admitted so publicly. So I think we've demonstrated a powerful commitment. We've already reclaimed, we is wrong, the Iraqis and their coalition folks on the ground have already reclaimed about 30% of the territory that had been held by ISIL. And ISIL can no longer move as easily. They can't drive in convoys. They can't communicate the way they were. We've gone after their financing. We had more than 60 countries here for the counter-violent extremism meeting. We have major initiatives underway to deal with the foreign fighters, the counter-finance, so forth. So all I can say to you is every one of those things is a manifestation of the administration's total commitment to defeat and destroy ISIL. Now, as you move out of Iraq, then there's more to do in Syria. We understand, Senator, that it's going to take more on the ground and more capacity to do that. As you've seen, there's been some discussion of an Arab force in the region. There's also discussion going on about how fast we can train up some of our opposition to be on the force, on the ground. And there are additional efforts going on with respect to what weapons, what methodologies may be undertaken, and those are the purview of a classified briefing. I can guarantee you no one in the region will have any doubt about our commitment to defeating ISIL.
Well, I can guarantee you, and I'm sorry this is taking so long, I appreciate your full answer, but I can guarantee you that today there are concerns. There are concerns about those most majorly needed in this coalition because of the very point that I just mentioned. I think you know that. I know the White House knows that. And I just hope that very soon the White House will not only make statements, but make agreements relative to what I just discussed, so that those who are going to be working with us in this fight understand that there is a real commitment, and that negotiations about the Iran nuclear deal and other issues are not in some way holding us back from making those commitments. But I thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Senator Menendez.
So 10 seconds, Senator, I just say to you, I really think if we get into a classified session and we go through more of this, I think you'll have a sense of the upgrading that has been taking place and the pressure that we've placed that will answer a lot of those questions. And I'll be attending a GCC meeting this Friday, I think it's Friday, in London, and we will be discussing all of this with our friends.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, based on some recent press reports, which I have found on more than on one occasion on this issue seems to have more meat than not. I often learn more about it through them. I want to share my deep concerns about where we appear to be headed in our negotiations with Iran, if those reports are true. The essence that I've gleaned from reading various of them is that one variation being discussed with the Iranians would place a 10-year regime of strict controls on Iran's uranium enrichment, but if Iran complied, the restrictions would be gradually lifted over the final 5 years. The core idea would be to reward Iran for good behavior over the last years of any agreement, gradually lifting constraints on both its uranium enrichment and easing more economic sanctions, which in essence, in my mind, doesn't make it a 10-year deal. It really makes it a 5-year deal if you're going to ease up on the ability of them to pursue enrichment capabilities. Can you give us a sense, are those reports accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I am absolutely going to answer your question. but I want to just...
And you're not going to take all my time to do it.
I promise you, unless the chairman might give you an extra minute here, but I just wanted to say, because you raised the issue, or strike that. It was raised by the chairman, so I'll wait and come back, and I won't chew up your time. The answer is the proverbial don't believe what you read, and I'm not going to go into the details of where we are, what we're doing.
Okay, since you're not going to go into the details, would you,
No, but-
would you phantom doing something like that?
Let me make it clear to you. We're looking for a deal that will prove over the long term that each pathway to a bomb is closed off. There are 4 pathways. One is through Natanz with enrichment. One is through Iraq through plutonium production. One is through Fordow through enrichment that is, partly underground. And finally, the other is covert. The covert, of course, is the hardest. You need to have verification and intrusive inspection to be able to define covert. President Obama has made the pledge that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon.
I've heard that pledge, and I believe that that's what he means. The question is, for how long, under what set of circumstances, and when you let Iran ratchet back up, and in essence give some future president maybe no choices but to pursue a military action, and very hard to try to get a global community once again when the
Sure.
sanctions have been released. So I get you're not going to give us a specifics,
Well,
but I want to raise my saber with you that I thought, and every time we've talked, we were talking about a 20-year time frame. Now we're talking about a 10-year time frame, if it's true, and with relief in the 5 latter years of the 10 years. If that happens to be in the universe, that's problematic, and I just want you to take that back with you, because I think
Well, I
it's
completely
really
respect
a great problem.
But the only thing I'd say to you, Senator, is, first of all, I've told you it's not true.
Okay,
But secondly, I'm not going to go into what is or isn't
Fine.
the situation.
fine.
But the one thing I'd say to everybody on this committee, the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, had a policy of no enrichment. And Iran in 2003 had 164 centrifuges. With a policy of no enrichment, that would have been for 5 years, 6 years. They moved up to a place where they now have perhaps 27,000 centrifuges, 19,000 installed, and you know the numbers that may be running. What happened? Who did what? Where was that administration with respect to the enforcement of a no enrichment policy? So guess what? They learned how to enrich. They're now enriching. And the question is whether or not one can now create a system where they have a peaceful nuclear program like other people who enrich that is manageable, controllable, verifiable, accountable, sufficient that they're living under the NPT.
Well, I am
and
certainly
everybody's
not an
confident.
advocate of what the Bush administration did. I criticized it during its period of time that Iran was pursuing this program, and that, in fact, the world was not responding in the aggressive way that we needed to, which
point
is
is,
now
Senator,
put
we're where we are.
at this threshold position.
I know.
But I just want to leave with you, because I want to move on to another subject, that if the parameters that are out there have, you said they're not true, fine. There could be elements of it that are not true, could be elements of it that are. If those are the parameters, that's problematic. Let me move to Ukraine. Putin took Crimea. He took Donetsk. He took Luhansk. He took the Voltava. While he's paid somewhat of a price, and you mentioned it in terms of sanctions, the price has not changed his behavior. The question is, under the Ukrainian Freedom Support Act, we gave the president significant powers. We supported an effort of, yes, sanctions, but also helping the Ukrainians be able to defensively protect themselves, and I would argue change Putin's equation, where there are consequences beyond economic sanctions to his continuous engagement. He is on a process that he's going to have a land bridge to Crimea, and when that happens, for all our talk of not forgetting Crimea, it'll be gone. And so the question is the administration ready to assist the Ukrainians in providing them with the wherewithal to defend themselves, as the Ukrainian Freedom Support Act, passed by a broad bipartisan vote in the Congress, provides for?
Well, Senator, that is under active consideration. I think you know that.
I don't know that, but I'm glad to hear that.
Well, it's under active. It's been written in the New York Times and elsewhere that this discussion is going on. We were in the Munich,
You just told me not to believe everything I read, so.
the Munich Security
So
Conference.
I don't know when it's good and when it's bad, but, you know,
Well-
you can cipher for it.
Of course, but it is the New York Times, right?
Well, that's a whole nother thing, but in any event.
What I wanted to say is that I just talked over lunch with the German foreign minister, who had just finished meeting in Paris with the Russian foreign minister, the Ukrainian foreign minister, and the French foreign minister. And they had a discussion about where they are in the implementation of Minsk. Whether or not the very aggressive breaches of the Minsk agreement are going to now be shifted into a compliance mode is critical to any decisions that are made by anybody as to what the next step is. The separatist movement is, in our judgment, a de facto extension of the Russian military, and it is an instrument of Russian national power, and that has been exercised in the ways that we obviously have objected to. What we have done in our sanctions have had a profound impact. The ruble is down 50%. Capital flight is in the total of about $151 billion. The predictions are that Russian economy will be in recession this year. There is a significant, I think they're down to 375 billion.
I don't disagree with you,
Okay,
but I would
so the
also
point I'm
say
making
that
is
he
they're paying the
continues to
price
send
now.
troops, armaments, and other assistance, heavy, significant assistance to the rebels, and sends people across the border. And at some point, you have to give the Ukrainians the wherewithal to defend themselves. I'm glad to hear it's under consideration. I would
Well, it's
only
under
urge you to argue
consideration.
for
As
it.
you know,
internally.
there are pros and cons on both sides of that argument, obviously.
Yeah.
It's under consideration.
Okay, finally,
And we'll see where we wind up in the next, in a short term.
one final follow-up on Ukraine. I know that there's a list of individuals, including individuals on the EU and Canadian targeted sanctions list as it relates to the Ukraine, that do not appear on the American list. The most egregious example in my mind is Alexander Bortnikov, the head of the Russian FSB. He is not on the U.S. list in relation to either Ukraine or Magnitsky, but is on the EU and Canadian list. Why? He was here, as a matter of fact, in the U.S. last week during President Obama's CVE conference. So I'm puzzled, and could you shed any light on that?
Yeah. We each had different choices about who we thought might be more effective to have a sanction on and what entity to sanction, individuals and entities. And so we both agreed that each would take their steps, and that would place pressure on all. And the next step, I think, if we take one in the next days, which is under consideration depending on what unfolds, will bring us into sync. So not only will we come into sync, but there will probably be additional sanctions to boot.
Thank you, sir. Senator Johnson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, welcome again. I want to go back to ISIL, and I just want to ask a pretty simple question. What does defeat look like? What does destroy mean, specifically?
Destroy means eliminate their presence on the field of battle and their ability to threaten the United States and other people
Over what period of time?
as fast as possible. Can't tell you what that'll be, and most people have predicted it'll take a fair amount of time.
In Iraq only or in Syria as well?
Everywhere, wherever they are. That's what the president has said, and that's what his policy is, and that's why he has asked for no geographical limitation.
Everybody, I think, has read the Atlantic article by Graham Wood talking about really what ISIL is all about. They require territory. Does that defeat mean denial of territory?
Ultimately, of course it does.
So what number would be left?
Look,
I'm trying to get some sort of sense here.
I mean, I can't tell you. Were there a few Nazis left after World War II? Sure. Did the war end, and was there unconditional surrender? Yes. Did it eliminate the threat? Yes. Did we rebuild Germany and move on with Japan? Yes. But were there some Nazis around? You bet. Will there be some members lingering around, as there are of other extremist groups? Most likely, but they'll suffer the same fate. The point is, as an organization, as an entity, as a viable sort of conglomerated threat to the United States and the West and the rest of the world, it will be destroyed.
Pretty well decimated. Okay, do you agree with, I think, most military experts that in order to achieve that decimation, that defeat, that destruction, is going to require ground forces? Some type.
I believe it will require some type of forces on the ground.
Now, if it's not...
Not ours, but some type.
Okay, so you got 30, 40,000 members of ISIL right now. Kind of the reports we're hearing is their numbers are growing faster than we're destroying them. They're not being degraded. They may be degraded in some places, but growing in others, spreading in other places. How many ground troops do you think it's going to take, realistically, to decimate them, to defeat them?
It's not up to me to prognosticate on the numbers of ground troops. That's something that General Dempsey and Sandy Winfield and others have to put together.
It would be.
But one thing I know is it's doable, and there are a number of different ways to do it. We're looking at exactly what that structure and format may be, and there are a number of ways to come at it, by the way, some of which mix kinetic with diplomatic. You know, we have to see what happens in the course of the decisions that are made over the course of the next weeks and months as to what shape that approach takes.
So we obviously have Arab states participating in airstrikes. Have you got commitments of other Arab states other than the Iraqi security forces and the Kurdish Peshmerga? Do you have commitments from any of the other states in terms of ground troops to join that coalition?
I have personally listened to affirmations of a willingness to do it under the right circumstances or under certain circumstances. I'm not going to call them commitments until they are in a context, but it clearly is a potential under certain circumstances.
Who would lead that ground effort?
Well, these are all the details that have to be worked out in an order of battle and a structure.
I understand their details, but is there really somebody targeted in terms of one of those Arab states that would actually lead that ground effort? Somebody capable of doing it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me go on to Ukraine. President Poroshenko did give a very impassioned speech here in front of a joint session of Congress where he did say, we don't need to provide the ground troops. They'll take care of defeating the rebels, but they have to have more than blankets. I know in discussions with a number of people that one of the reluctance of providing those defensive weaponry is that the calculation is if we provide defensive lethal weaponry, Russia will just up the ante. Is that one of the cons? Is that one of the things that the administration is concerned about?
Well, I'm not going to articulate the parameters of the debate in terms of what they're concerned or not concerned about, but an argument is certainly made by people that whatever you put in, nobody, not even Poroshenko, who I met with a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago, not even he believes that they can get enough material that they can win. He believes they might be able to raise the cost and do more damage. But there isn't anybody who believes that Ukraine, with its size of its military and its current structure, is going to have the ability on its own to win a war against Russia. So there's an imbalance to start with here. And you have to try to, sort of pin that in. Now, that doesn't mean it isn't worth raising the cost. And there are plenty of people advocating that you ought to raise the cost no matter what. So those are the things that have to be balanced here.
Another concern I've heard voiced, and I agree with this, that the weaker Russia becomes, the more dangerous they are. Is that a calculation you agree with as well?
Not necessarily. It's certainly one of the theories that is put on the table. It's a calculation you have to analyze and weigh, but it doesn't necessarily have to be true, no. There are elements internally within Russia that ultimately could come to play, who knows when and how. An economy by the summer that is still hurting could be an economy that some people predict could create internal dissension and different kinds of problems. There is chatter today about a very isolated Putin with an isolated group of people advocating this and people scared to, I mean, there are different parameters to this. I'm not going to sit here and analyze it, at this moment, but except to say there are lots of different considerations.
A quick budget-related question. I think everybody that's gone over to Ukraine, Eastern Europe is dismayed at really how effective Russian propaganda is, and really, there's really no pushback. We've unilaterally disarmed in terms of propaganda war. Is that something within your State Department budget you're looking to increase and try and counter?
You bet it is, but I have to tell you, it is within the constraints that we're operating in, and it is nowhere near what it ought to be. We are engaged in a major initiative. We're working with the Emiratis. There's a new center for disseminating information that's being put together that the Emiratis are paying for. And this will be a major center for use of social media to counter some of the propaganda that's being put out by ISIL itself. But Russia has resorted to a level, and you all see it, it floods the Baltic states, it floods Poland, it floods the frontline states, Bulgaria, et cetera, et cetera. It has a major impact, and we just frankly are not allocating the money to counter the way we ought to be. And we're fully prepared to go out there and undertake this. Senator, you mentioned at the beginning why we use OCO. This is one of the reasons. We rely on OCO because, frankly, the appropriations aren't on time. And so we need multi-year authority to do multi-year tasks. And we need to get the resources to be able to respond to this kind of thing. With about $7 billion in OCO, and we're putting a fair amount of that into Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria, humanitarian assistance, counterterrorism partnership, countering Russian pressure. We have $350 million. So that's how we're bolstering Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia to actually go after this. It's not enough. I'm just telling you bluntly, it's not enough. And they're spending hugely on this vast propaganda machine, which people believe in the places they get them because there's nothing countering it. So according to people in many of those states, we're the problem. Russia is there defending Russian-speaking people. There's no sense of Russian transgression across the border. The people in Russia don't even know how many soldiers are dying. It's completely hidden from them. And we need to be able to counter this and tell the story. So
my point exactly. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, it's always a pleasure to have you before our committee. Just on Ukraine, one point. Some of us have been there. We've seen the problems in the country. They've been asking for capacity to defend their own borders. They know that they cannot stand up to the Russian military, but they do need the capacity in order to protect their borders from Russian incursion. And that's why we passed the authorization in this Congress. And I would just urge the administration with some urgency to look at an aid package that will allow the Ukrainians greater capacity to protect against the incursions continuing to be made by Russia. We cannot believe anything President Putin says about his intentions. He's shown by his actions a willingness to counter all the agreements that he's entered into. So I would just urge the administration to be more aggressive in providing the help to the Ukrainian people. A second point I want to make is that we've had a hearing here on trafficking in persons, and we'll have a markup later this week. During that hearing, we had Assistant Secretary Sewell, who offered to help us in regards to using the leverage we have in the trade negotiations on the TPP to deal with improved labor conditions, particularly in countries that we're negotiating with that have less than acceptable rights. I mentioned Malaysia, which is a Tier 3 country under the TIP report, and I would just urge your personal attention as we get close to these negotiations to use that leverage to improve labor conditions on trafficking and all issues on trafficking in the countries that we're negotiating with the TPP. But the question I want to ask you about is the Summit of Americas that will be taking place in April. President Obama, I understand, intends to participate in it. And there's a lot happening in our hemisphere. One of the initiatives that's included in the President's budget is $1 billion of aid to the 3 Central American countries to try to deal with the crisis that we experienced last year with the unaccompanied children. We've seen a law, but I think most of us know that the conditions are still there, and we're likely to see a rise of matters on our border as the weather changes. My question to you is that we can't just continue to layer aid programs. We need to make sure that our aid programs really are effective. And in conversations with some of the leaders in our hemisphere, they hope to use the Summit of Americas to deal with the opportunity challenges in the region so that the people of our hemisphere have hope in their own countries for economic growth. Can you just share with us the role that the United States plans to take in the Summit of the Americas and how we can help try to provide real opportunities within not just the 3 Central American countries that are targets for immigration, but also dealing with the security issues and dealing with the areas that have been at the root cause of so many children leaving Honduras and El Salvador and
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Senator Cardin, very, very much, and thank you for your constant vigilance on these kind of critical issues of rights, human rights, and of security and opportunity. We are very, very focused on the Summit of the Americas. I went down to the Panamanian president's inauguration. We talked then about the lead-in. We've had any number of conversations since then. Vice President's been engaged in this. We want to make sure there's a civil society component to the discussion there and human rights, and we've pushed that, and that has been a sine qua non of our willingness to have any presence of Cuba or some others there. That's got to be an upfront discussion of these issues, and that's got to be engaged in. That's number one. Number two, when I was in Mexico last year, I took advantage of that to have a meeting personally with the 3 presidents, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And it was at the height of the unaccompanied children problem. And we had a very frank discussion in which we talked about the need for enforcement, frankly, for their help to close borders, to prevent people from moving. But obviously, in exchange, we also had to talk about reducing the incentives for people to want to do that, and they were very frank about that part of it. One of the principal reasons for those departures was the circumstances within which those folks were living. The violence, the fear, the narco-trafficking, the criminality, the bad governance, the corruption, and all of those pieces. So that's why we've put this $1 billion request together for you, and we're doing it with I think, a healthy dose of humility and wisdom acquired through mistakes in the past. In other words, how you manage that money, where it goes, what the support system is underneath it, what the transparency and accountability is with respect to how and where it's spent. We've targeted 3 key areas. Security, so we will work with police, we'll work with the judicial system, we'll work with the, parental and education and other components of trying to make sure we're reaching the kids and creating the security structure necessary. The second piece of it is governance itself.
And I would urge on the governance piece, which I think is going to be the most challenging, considering the history of corruption, et cetera, that there be ways that we can evaluate whether progress, in fact, is being made. I think we all support the effort of safer countries and opportunity in the countries and good governance, but we have to have accountability in these programs. We've had many programs in Central America, and the results have been less than consequential.
Right. You're absolutely correct. I don't disagree with that at all. And one of the first conversations I had with Raj Shah when I came in was how do we improve our development delivery system? How do we sort of blend Millennium Challenge Corporation kind of goals without defeating the notion that sometimes you're going to have to do assistance that is not as economic based, but it's more humanitarian. It has a genuine sort of other kind of purpose. And there will be some economic, there will be assistance like that. But what we decided is to put about $250 million into reinforcing the democratic institutions, to increasing transparency and accountability, for instance, like making information available to people through internet where it's available, or publication or otherwise, targeting corruption specifically, which we can be particularly helpful with given our knowledge and law enforcement community input. We can strengthen efficiency, accountability of the judicial institutions. We know we can help them with improvement of the management of their funds by creating tracking systems, accounting systems, computerized systems, accountability, and so forth. And all of that is part of our goal. The key is who's doing it underneath. You're not just giving them the money and saying, go do it. You've got mentoring and implementers and experienced people coming in and working side by side and helping to make it happen. It's labor intensive, but it's probably the only way to have the accountability I think everybody wants.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Secretary Kerry. You quoted in your testimony Dean Acheson from decades ago. I thought it was an apt quote saying that these problems that we have in foreign policy will stay with us until death. It's hardly a surprise, or should be a surprise, when contingencies come up. You said that his words remind us that, quote, we long ago entered into an era of virtually nonstop danger, whether in one part of the world or another, or regarding one type of challenge or another. So that tells us that we have a lot of issues and will continue to have, yet we're requesting OCO funds as if these are unforeseen, that pulling out of Afghanistan or out of Iraq or new problems in Syria or Iraq are somehow unforeseen and we can't plan for them. If we've been in this kind of period since World War II, why is it that only now, since 2012, has the State Department started requesting OCO funds? Now, prior to that, I understand there were supplemental appropriations that went to state for various contingencies. But it's only since 2012 that these OCO funds have been requested. And in my view, and I think the view that all of us have, is that the State Department is becoming overly reliant on OCO funding. You've described these as temporary, as unforeseen, and something that we need to move away from, yet we seem to be overly reliant on them. Do you want to comment on that?
You're right. We are. And it's because we can't get the budget increase we need to institutionalize it. Put it in the budget. I mean, we're already asking for what I think is tantamount to, if you take all of our foreign assistance, because of the OCO, it's about a 14% increase. If you take or an 8% increase, if you take just the parts of the USAID and State Department, which is about, 50.3 billion, that represents a 6% increase, I guess. The point
Well-
I'm making is, are you prepared to give us what would then amount if we institutionalized OCO, the larger increase? That's how simple it is. You want to institutionalize it, please do. And while you're at it, up it to the amounts we need to do the other things I've talked about. Happy
And
to give you a
if we
bigger
were to
budget.
do that, then no more OCO funds would be requested? Is that what
Well,
you're
no,
saying?
what I'm saying, look, you're always going to have an emergency. Senator, I can't,
No, I
there's
understand
no way
that.
for me to come in front of you and tell you that,
I understand that, but
and
th-
that's
but
going to
those,
require a kind of OCO.
and those have been dealt with
And so I
supplemental
think it's
appropriations.
important to have, I don't want to be flippant about this. I
Right.
do think it's important to have an overseas contingency
We
fund.
we have always dealt with issues like that with the supplemental.
But should
the
it
problem is
reflect-
with OCO, as I think all of us recognize, is it's kind of just an offline, budgetary amount
You're
that
absolutely
we
correct.
deal with, and we just increase OCO funds. And so it's a layer that we shouldn't have. and
No
it just-
argument from me. You know, the way to deal with it is pass the authorization, and we'll work with you to do it. And then we got to get the appropriate people to fill out the authorization. Otherwise, we'll be right back here with another OCO request. And by the way, it would help if we had an actual budget rather than a continuing resolution, I think.